Many people, when they think of the fall of Rome, imagine barbarians storming palaces, legions collapsing, or emperors poisoned in their courts. But empires do not collapse only because of external attacks. They rot from within. And one of the most corrosive forces has always been money. Rome did not fall solely because of invasions or corruption. It fell because its currency collapsed. And the lessons drawn from that collapse are still relevant for every modern economy that believes it can play with money and walk away unscathed. Let's set the scene. For centuries, the economic backbone of Rome was the silver denarius. First minted around 201 BC, this coin was made of nearly pure silver and was trusted throughout the empire and beyond. Roman soldiers were paid with it. Merchants demanded it. Ordinary people stored their wealth in it. The denarius was more than money. It was a safe haven in metal form. The power of the empire and the value of its money were intertwined. As long as people believed in Rome, they believed in its currency. But running an empire is expensive. Legions had to be paid, roads and aqueducts built, and wars financed. By the 2nd century AD, Rome's resources were no longer sufficient. Forced to defend its borders against Germanic tribes, the Parthians in the east, and internal unrest, the empire found that tax revenues could no longer cover military spending. So it turned to an old method: debasement. Instead of raising taxes on citizens, which was never popular, the silver content of the denarius was reduced. The numbers tell the story. Under Emperor Augustus, at the height of the early empire, the denarius contained about 95% silver. By the reign of Caracalla in the early 3rd century, this had fallen to around 50%. By the mid-3rd century, under Emperor Gallienus, the denarius contained less than 5% silver. What had once been a solid silver coin had become a silver-washed bronze disc. People could see and feel the difference. Inflation followed. Because the currency was no longer tied to real value, prices began to rise. A measure of wheat that once cost a single denarius suddenly cost dozens. This was not an abstract theory. It devastated the lives of ordinary Romans. Soldiers demanded higher pay to keep up with rising costs. Merchants refused debased coins and preferred barter or payment in gold. Local economies reverted to direct exchange as trust in money evaporated. And the more trust eroded, the more emperors responded by minting even more cheap coins, hoping volume would replace value. This vicious cycle, repeated in countless inflations since, reached its peak during the so-called crisis of the 3rd century. Between AD 235 and 284, Rome endured nearly 50 years of chaos, invasions, plagues, civil wars, and economic collapse. Emperors rose and fell at dizzying speed, sometimes ruling only months before assassination. Behind the political chaos lay a broken financial system. Taxes were demanded in coins that steadily lost value. Farmers abandoned their land. Earning money no longer made sense. Trade networks collapsed, and the Roman government resorted to desperate measures, from price controls to forced labor, to keep the system alive. None worked. Emperor Diocletian tried to stop the bleeding. In AD 301, he issued the edict on maximum prices, fixing the prices of over 1,000 goods and services, from grain to wages. Violators faced death. The edict was a disaster. When money itself is worthless, prices cannot be controlled by decree. Black markets exploded and official trade nearly vanished. People quickly learned that law cannot repair broken money. Eventually, Rome abandoned the denarius altogether. Around AD 312, Constantine the Great introduced the solidus, a gold coin of consistent purity. It restored a measure of stability and endured for centuries in the Eastern Roman or Byzantine Empire. But by then, the Western Empire was already mortally weakened. The debasement of the denarius had hollowed out Rome's economic core. Armies became unsustainable, trade networks shattered, trust was gone. Rome's fall was not a single event, but a long process of decay. The collapse of its currency was one of the sharpest points in that process. What does this mean for us today? The destruction of money has always meant the destruction of empires. Rome believed it could deceive its people by minting coins that looked the same but contained less real value. Modern governments believe they can do the same by printing paper money, manipulating interest rates, or inflating away debt. But the outcome is always the same. The public pays the price, wealth is destroyed, and trust collapses. Rome learned this lesson the hard way, and if we ignore it, we will repeat it. History did not stop teaching after Rome. Every major inflation crisis since has followed the same pattern. Governments debase money to cover costs. Elites protect themselves with real assets. Ordinary people are ruins. Fast forward to the 20th century, and the echoes are deafening. After World War I, Germany faced crushing reparations under the Treaty of Versailles. To meet its obligations, the government turned to the printing press, believing it could cover its debts just as Rome once minted more coins. By 1923, hyperinflation had taken hold. A loaf of bread that cost 1 mark before the war cost over 200 billion marks by that autumn. People carried wages home in wheelbarrows. Pensioners starved as their life savings evaporated. And just as in Rome, those with debt saw it erased by inflation, while those holding real assets, land, factories, foreign currency, emerged stronger. Money became meaningless, and economic despair fueled political extremism, paving the way for the rise of Hitler. Zimbabwe followed the same path in the early 2000s. Facing land seizures, collapsing production, and rising debt, the government turned to the printing press. By 2008, inflation reached an unimaginable level, 89.7 sextillion% annually. Prices doubled daily. Shops could not change price tags fast enough. Eventually, Zimbabwe abandoned its currency altogether, forcing citizens to transact in US dollars or South African rand. Once again, a government believed it could cheat reality. Once again, the people paid the price. But you do not have to look only at extremes. Even in modern developed economies, the Roman model lives on. Take the United States. In 1971, President Richard Nixon took the dollar off the gold standard, severing the last link between currency and a tangible anchor. From that moment on, the dollar became what economists call fiat money, backed not by gold, but by trust in the government. And just like in Rome, the temptation to spend beyond means became irresistible. In the decades that followed, debt ballooned, the money supply expanded, and inflation became a constant undercurrent. We did not see wheelbarrows of cash, but we did see a steady erosion of purchasing power. $1 in 1971 could buy what now costs more than $6. Coins look the same, banknotes look the same, but the value has been hollowed out. The trick is always the same. Governments disguise inflation as growth. They tell citizens that higher wages mean prosperity, even as costs rise faster. They present debt as investment, even when it finances consumption. They point to rising stock markets as proof of wealth, even though the majority owns little of them. Like Roman emperors, they insist nothing fundamental has changed, while quietly extracting value from every coin, every banknote, every paycheck. What makes this dangerous today is scale. Rome's collapse was imperial. Weimar hyperinflation was national. Zimbabwe's was local. But today, the entire world runs on fiat currencies, massive debt, and central banks ready to print trillions at the first sign of crisis. That means the next collapse will not be confined to one empire or one country. It will spread globally. And if history is any guide, those who suffer will not be asset-owning elites, but millions of people whose wages, pensions, and savings are denominated in increasingly fragile currencies. So what lesson should you, as an individual, take from Rome's monetary crisis? First, understand that inflation is not an accident. It is a policy, a silent tax that has destroyed empires for 2,000 years. Second, realize that real wealth is not numbers on paper or screens, but assets that retain value even when money fails: land, skills, productivity, businesses, resources. Third, never assume stability is permanent. Romans in the first century would have laughed if told their money would one day be worthless. Germans in 1913 scoffed at the idea of wheelbarrows of cash. Zimbabweans in the 1980s believed independence promised prosperity. In every case, the same story unfolded. Rome's fall reminds us that financial systems can collapse slowly, then suddenly, as trust evaporates. When money ceases to be real, society itself begins to unravel. Contracts fail, trade breaks down, armies dissolve, governments lose legitimacy. Barbarians at the gate may finish the job, but the real killer is always inside the treasury. And here is the crucial point. History does not repeat itself, but if you do not understand it, it will crush you in the same way. The Roman monetary crisis was not just about bad emperors or greedy elites. It was about the fragility of money itself when abused by power, and that fragility has never disappeared. If this gave you a new perspective, subscribe. History holds the answers.